Hey everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Linux and Open Source News Show. This week we've got Fedora, maybe planning to add some telemetry in Fedora 42, but don't worry, it will be opt-in. We have the potential death of ChromeOS Flex, as Google plans to rebase ChromeOS on the Android stack, and this is probably incompatible with letting anyone install Flex on any device. And we also have Deepin, the Chinese distro, testing the waters of AI and adding some relatively interesting features to their release candidate for Deepin 23. And we also have this segue to our sponsor. This video is sponsored by TuxCare. You've probably heard about them by now on the channel. They are your one-stop shop for making sure your Linux servers or workstations are always up to date and secured with the latest patches with minimal disruptions. Their solutions enable you to automatically apply security patches without downtime or reboots, as well as to extend the lifecycle of end-of-life distributions. They also deliver enterprise-grade support for AlmaLinux, which is a popular forever free replacement distribution for the now end-of-life CentOS 7 users. And it is now super easy to get access to their Linux security offerings, as they've launched online license purchasing. You can now subscribe straight from the website without having to talk to a sales representative or to request a quote. So you can just head over to the website linked in the description and you can start using their automated live patching solution, extended lifecycle support service, or enterprise support for AlmaLinux on your own terms. If your organization uses Linux and you'd like to give any of these services a go, just click the link that I left in the description. Okay, so Fedora 42 might include some telemetry. A proposal was submitted to let users opt into sharing a few metrics. These would include system hardware information like the model and the maker of your CPU, GPU, amount of RAM and things like that. You would also transfer certain system settings like the language, the input methods, and some accessibility related settings as well. You would transmit the apps that you're using, the number of open workspaces, how often you access the settings, and some performance details like, for example, disk speeds or network speeds, plus any evidence of issues and crashes you might have encountered. Now, no IP address would be collected with this data, and no personal info either. All these data points would be grabbed and sent on their own, not as a single big data dump. So fingerprinting would be harder to do as well. It is still a lot of data, and the reason why developers are proposing this is so they know what to prioritize and what to focus their efforts on in the future. Obviously, this is going to be controversial. Every piece of data being collected in the Linux world is always controversial, but I think they are doing it in the right way. You're not doing it like Ubuntu, where it's opt-out. Here, you decide to share things. By default, nothing is shared, much like what KDE offers, for example, where you've got that user feedback slider. By default, it is off. So I think this is a good thing, because if you don't want to give out any data, you just don't have to change anything. And if you want to contribute some data to the Fedora project so they can optimize their work in the future, you just turn this thing on, and it should be safe and anonymous, so I don't think it's a big issue. Now, Deepin, the Chinese distribution with its own, admittedly quite nice looking, but also admittedly quite under-featured desktop, is pushing for its own AI assistant and AI features in general. First is a new personal knowledge assistant. The way it works is you feed it your own documents, and the AI will arrange them into a knowledge base that you can use in the future. It's not a general-purpose AI chatbot like ChatGPT. It's only going to know what you fed it. So it's gonna be useful for researchers on certain topics or when writing long student papers. It all runs locally on the device with a local model. The second part is the Deepin System Assistant, and it's meant to explain and answer questions about how the system works. It will give you answers to questions regarding system features, the settings, the shortcuts for specific actions, and more. It's basically an AI assistant for the manual of your computer. This thing also apparently runs locally. Finally, they added AI to the system-wide search feature called Grand Search. This thing lets you tell your system what you want to do, and it will do it for you. You can say things like change my wallpaper to waves.jpg, or change the audio volume to 50%, or reduce the display brightness, or turn off Bluetooth. The model this uses apparently also accepts large language models in the OpenAI format, so it is possible to extend it with more features and commands. This one though, I am not sure if it runs locally or if it calls to a cloud server somewhere. If you want to test these things, they are available in the Deepin 23 release candidate. And I know I am generally very critical of AI because when it comes from big names in the AI sphere, it's generally privacy invasive and generally the data they use to train their model hasn't been collected ethically. When it runs locally on your computer and you feed it your own information, so it acts as your own personal, easily accessible database, I don't have a problem with that. I think it's actually a cool feature. For tech support, the tech support assistant is also not that bad. As per the grand search, I guess for accessibility reasons it's probably good to have something like that, but I do hope that this giant system-wide search and action system does not call to an online server and also runs locally. I could not find info about that. I do hope some other distributions implement the same kind of stuff. If it runs locally and it's trained on your own data, I really don't have a problem with it. Obviously, I will test this release candidate on the channel as well and give you my impressions about those features. Now, you might know about ChromeOS Flex, the install ChromeOS anywhere system that Google tried to push at some point. Well, it looks like this might follow the usual Google playbook and it just might get abandoned as a project. A blog post from the directors of product engineering and product management for ChromeOS points towards ChromeOS being integrated with Android. The Android kernel and its frameworks will become the foundation for ChromeOS. And this has obvious implications regarding the ability to install ChromeOS on any computer, because the Android kernel might be based on Linux, but it's also severely stripped down and just doesn't run on most computers. It doesn't have the necessary systems or the necessary drivers. Now, there is the Android x86 project that Google might use to power ChromeOS Flex, but this project is not supported by Google and it lags a lot behind the current Android version. It is at version 10 when Android is at version 14. So it is very unlikely to be used by Chrome to keep maintaining an x86 compatible version of ChromeOS Flex. So this probably means that when Google moves to the entire Android stack for ChromeOS, Flex and probably just the general version of ChromeOS will no longer work on x86 computers. I won't say it's a big loss because it isn't. I gave a shot to ChromeOS a while back and I found it severely underwhelming. There is simply no real use case where a Linux distro will not perform the same job better. It has more hardware compatibility than ChromeOS Flex, the desktop environments are generally more powerful, have more features, are more usable, and more polished. You have a bigger app selection. The only real advantage of ChromeOS Flex is probably its integration with Google services. If you really depend on every single Google suite of tools, then maybe ChromeOS Flex is a better choice, but in most cases, a Linux distro will just serve you better. You can always run all of these services in any single web browser that you want, so it's not a big deal. Now, this week we also saw another pretty bad security vulnerability. OpenSSH, something a huge proportion of servers use, apparently has a glaring security gap introduced 4 years ago, and that could affect up to 14 million servers worldwide. This flaw is called regression, where the sh sound is made by the SSH letters, and it's a regression, obviously, of a previously fixed flaw that was reintroduced in the codebase a while back. This vulnerability lets attackers execute code with admin privileges, and it can let them take over the entire system, install malware, create backdoors, and more. This thing is classified as being as serious as the Log4j problem from 2021 because it is very widespread and very threatening. Now, hopefully, by the time you're listening to this, a fix is out, so make sure to update your various systems that make use of OpenSSH. Most server distros are probably going to be very reactive in updating their package repos for this, so chances are the fix is already out, chances are your server is already up to date, but just make sure to check for updates if there's something that you don't maintain every day. Check it out, it can't hurt. Mint 22 now has its first beta. The codename is Wilma, and it's based on Ubuntu 24.04 LTS. Although, as always, it drops a lot of what makes Ubuntu into Ubuntu. There are no snaps, and they actually built a deb package for Thunderbird, because Ubuntu decided to ship it with a snap by default. There's obviously no GNOME in there, it's replaced with Cinnamon 6.2. Mint 22 will default to Pipewire, it comes with the kernel 6.8, and they have a new online accounts app to replace the settings panel that just couldn't be used by Mint anymore because it had moved to GTK4 and couldn't be themed by Linux Mint. The font viewer was removed for the same reasons. It is a libadwaita app that Mint cannot theme, so they dropped it, and a few other default apps were downgraded to their GTK3 versions, including the video player, the calculator, the scanning utility, the disk usage analyzer, the system monitor, the calendar, the archive manager, and one or two more. Another important change that I talked about in a previous episode is hiding unverified Flatpaks by default, and if you decide to re-enable them in the software manager settings, you still will not see their ratings and user comments, which in my opinion is a poor decision because it removes a way to get your own information on whether a third-party Flatpak is well maintained, even if it's not official. You'll also get a new matrix client by default, a new layout editor to change the order of actions in the file manager's context menu, you'll get improved Wayland support on the experimental session, and a few other smaller changes to the default apps. If you currently enjoy the Mint experience, chances are Mint 22 will be absolutely satisfactory for you as well. My only concern, honestly, with Linux Mint is will they have enough manpower to maintain both a distribution base, because they take Ubuntu space but they do a lot of work to make it run as they want it to run by removing snap, for example, and changing other packages. They build their own desktop environment, which is no small task. Cinnamon is pretty feature complete, and they're working on improving the Wayland session as well. That's a lot of work. And now they're gonna have to maintain a lot of their default applications as well that previously were just basically GNOME apps that they didn't modify all that much. So is that going to be too much work? We'll have to see. I hope not. I hope they can handle this because Mint is a fantastic distribution. Now, Proton keeps expanding their suite of tools, now with Proton Docs, a privacy-focused alternative to Google Docs. You can already access Proton Docs from Proton Drive if you have a Proton account, and they're saying that it's not meant to replace Standard Notes, Standard Notes being an application that Proton bought a while back. Proton Docs is a word processor, not a note-taking application. So the first release of this app supports rich text, obviously real-time collaborative editing, where you can know where other people editing the same document as you are currently in the document. There are comments and feedback. There's support for Microsoft's docx format, because unfortunately it is still the standard, and it supports images, audio, and video, although it only works on the web right now. There's no desktop client, and it doesn't seem to work on smartphones just yet. Proton said that they wanted to have every feature that Google Docs has eventually, and they also said that everything here is end-to-end encrypted, as you might expect from something coming from Proton. Every key press that you make, every cursor movement is apparently encrypted and protected and cannot be accessed by Proton's employees or anyone that is not logged into your account. The rationale is, of course, to expand Proton's suite of online tools and services to fight Google and to fight other privacy-invasive solutions. I guess this is a pretty solid addition. Now, full disclaimer, Proton is a regular sponsor of the channel. They obviously did not sponsor this video, or you would have seen a sponsored mention for them. Me personally, I'm slowly moving to their ecosystem, but I'm still waiting on a Linux client for Proton Drive, which will let me sync files in the background. Until they have this, I can't really use the entire suite. So Proton Docs is cool, but I'm waiting for a Drive client first. And let's finish this with the Linux gaming news. First, Linux's Steam market share is apparently staying at above 2% for yet another month. It did go down a little bit in June compared to May. It dropped to 2.08% instead of 2.32% in May, which is a significant loss. macOS also dropped, and Windows obviously grew back from the sum total of what macOS and Linux lost. This is not unexpected in Steam's results. All this data is based on a voluntary survey, and it will thus fluctuate depending on which game is popular at the time, whether it's compatible with anything else than Windows, who is playing it on which computer, and the like. It also looks like less people used their Steam Deck, as SteamOS dropped a bit in terms of which distro is being used. It is still 41% of the Linux market share on Steam, with Arch, the Flatpak version of Steam, Mint, and Ubuntu gaining a bit back on SteamOS. I'm not saying it's the Elden Ring DLC, but it's probably the Elden Ring DLC. It apparently had a lot of performance problems, and these maybe have been compounded on Linux, so maybe people went back to Windows to play that stuff instead of playing on their Steam Deck. Who knows? Anyways, the Steam market share for Linux is generally growing. We are going up, dropping down, but we're generally dropping down by less than what we've gone up, meaning that the overall trend is still a net positive, which is encouraging. It is still an insanely small market share, but it is encouraging. And we also have some more progress on FEX, the x86 emulator for ARM on Linux. There's been a big update to it that now enables support for the AVX and AVX2 instructions that modern x86 CPUs have, and that some games are starting to depend on. This is on top of a bunch of other instructions being added, with barbaric names like FMA3 VAES or VPCLMULQDQ. Yes, this is actually a real instruction, apparently. Now, to make things short, this new support lets you run games like Metro Exodus or Crysis 3 Remastered on an ARM CPU that obviously doesn't have access to these instructions, because the emulator maps these instructions to the ones that the ARM CPUs have. They also added some general optimizations to reduce the translation time between x86 to ARM by about 10%, which is a solid performance boost. And if you're wondering who cares about ARM CPUs and emulating x86 programs, well, everyone should probably care, because it looks like ARM is going to be an important part of the consumer PC market. We're seeing more and more devices come out with ARM CPUs running Windows, and we even have some prototypes running Linux. There's one from Tuxedo that was announced at Computex, I think it was last month. For open source programs, we don't really care. They will be recompiled for ARM, the code is open, it will be doable with more or less effort. But for proprietary titles that never really supported Linux and that you need, for example, Proton to run, having this emulation and translation layer is absolutely mandatory if we want to keep the hard-won compatibility that we managed to get so far. So, an emulator is very important. macOS has one, Windows has one, Linux needs one as well, and FEX looks like it is in a pretty good place. Just like this sponsor is placed pretty perfectly in this video. It's Tuxedo computers. You have heard about them by now if you have watched any of my videos. They're based in Germany, they ship to almost every country in the world. They make laptops, desktops, and small form factor computers that run with Linux out of the box. They provide support for these computers, they actually contribute some driver support for them. They have PPAs if your distro doesn't have these patches, or if these patches haven't been accepted upstream. They have repos for you to add this support back in. All the devices are very customizable. You can open the laptops, repair them, upgrade them, you can change the keyboard layout, you can pick the components. They are really good. I only use Tuxedo computers these days. My channel runs on one of their laptops, my gaming is done on one of their desktops. I don't use anything else. So if you need a new computer, you plan to run Linux on it, and you want to support a company that actively supports Linux, click the link in the description below. So this will conclude this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't hesitate to like, to subscribe, to turn on notifications, to write a comment. And if you really enjoy the channel and you like having the news, please do take a look at the links in the description. If you become a YouTube member or a Patreon subscriber, you'll get a daily audio podcast with these exact news, so you don't have to wait for the end of the week. From Monday to Friday, it's 10 minutes, it's audio, it's great. So, thanks for watching, and I guess you'll hear me in the next one next week, or see me next week. Bye!